I am Kate, 29 years old, living in Alpharetta, working as a hospice intake coordinator at a small nonprofit clinic. I begin this story with a confession because silence almost killed me. 3 years ago, I walked away from the only man I ever loved, and I let him believe it was because I wanted more money, more comfort, more security than he could give. I let him hate me. I let him erase me. What he never knew was that my body was already betraying me, quietly, efficiently, the way a clock runs out without making noise. On the night I left, snow pressed against the apartment windows like it was trying to listen. Mark stood in the kitchen holding a folded job offer, his hands shaking with hope. I remember the smell of burnt coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the way my chest felt too tight for my lungs. I told him I was tired of waiting, tired of struggling, tired of loving a man who could not promise me stability. The words landed exactly where I aimed them. He looked at me as if I had suddenly become a stranger who spoke his language perfectly, but meant every sentence as a weapon. I had just turned 26. 2 weeks earlier, a doctor with careful eyes told me I had an aggressive autoimmune disorder that would likely destroy my organs within years. There was no cure. Only management, only delays, only the slow negotiation between pain and time. I did the math in my head and realized that loving me would cost Mark everything. Hospital bills, missed opportunities, watching someone he loved fade. I decided then that he deserved a life without my shadow over it. So I became the villain in my own story. I packed my clothes before dawn. I deleted my messages. I changed my number. I moved across the city and learned how to swallow pain without making a sound. I built a version of myself that looked functional, independent, cold. That version is the one he remembers. Now I am telling this because the past does not stay buried. It waits. It sharpens itself. Last week I saw Mark again, standing in a hospital corridor, older, steadier, wearing a wedding ring that cut through me like glass. He did not recognize me at first. When he did, his eyes filled with something far worse than anger, pity. This is not a love story that begins with hope. It begins with a lie, a disease, and a choice that cannot be undone. You decide whether I was cruel or brave. Listen carefully, because everything that follows, every tear, every regret, every moment of tenderness and ruin started here, with me choosing to disappear so the man I loved could survive. I ask you to stay with me because the truth unfolds slowly, and the ending will test your patience, your judgment, and your understanding of love in the end. The day Mark moved in across the hall, the building smelled like wet cardboard and cheap paint. Portland had been doing that cold drizzle that does not fall hard enough to be called rain, but never stops long enough for you to forget it. I had just come back from the clinic with a plastic bag of medications, and the kind of exhaustion that made my bones feel borrowed. My mother, Diane, had left the porch light on for me the way she always did, like she could guide me back from the edge of whatever was eating me. I heard the elevator doors open before I saw him. That sound used to mean nothing. Now it is a trigger, metal on metal, a soft ding, footsteps, a laugh that belonged to someone else. When I turned, Mark was there, holding a box against his chest like it weighed less than air. His hair was darker than I remembered, cut clean. Not the messy student curls that used to fall into his eyes when he read casebooks at my kitchen table. He looked older in a way that made him more dangerous. Not because he was stronger, but because he had learned how to hide what he felt. For half a second, I forgot how to breathe. I stood in the narrow hallway with my keys in my hand, staring at him like I was staring at a ghost that refused to stay dead. His eyes landed on me, and the recognition did not come gently. It hit him, and I watched his mouth tighten, watched his shoulders lock, watched him build a wall in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Well," he said, voice flat, polite in the way a judge is polite right before sentencing. Small world. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to say I am sorry. I wanted to say you were right to hate me. Instead, I bent down, because my keys had slipped from my fingers, and the movement gave me something to do besides shatter. "Yeah," I managed. "I did not know you lived here." "I do now," he said. The elevator chimed again. A woman stepped out behind him, tall and sleek, the kind of pretty that looks expensive without trying. She wore a cream coat and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her gaze flicked over me, taking inventory. Puffy jacket, snow boots even though it was barely autumn, a face too pale for a woman my age. "Mark?" she asked sweetly. "Who is this?" The word "who" hurt more than I expected. Not even a name, not even a memory. Mark did not look at me when he answered. "Our neighbor," he said. "Kate, we just met. Just met." Like we had not spent 4 years building a future in cheap apartments and late-night diner booths. Like he had not once pressed his forehead to mine and promised me he would never leave. The woman's smile widened. "I am Claire," she said, as if introducing herself was a favor. "We just moved in. Please let us know if we do anything annoying." Her eyes drifted to my sleeves, to the way my hands trembled. "You dress like you are headed to a ski lodge," she added lightly. "You must get cold easily." I forced a laugh that sounded wrong in my own ears. "I am just sensitive to weather." Mark finally looked at me then, but not with softness. He looked the way people look at a cracked windshield, annoyed by the damage and curious about the impact. "Come on," he said to Claire, already turning away. "I am hungry." The door across the hall shut with a decisive click. The sound echoed in my ribs. I stood there with my medications biting into my palm, feeling like the hallway had turned into a vacuum. No air, no time. Just the awareness that the man I loved lived 12 feet away, and he had built a life that did not include me. When I went inside, my mother was in the kitchen wiping down the counter for the 3rd time, a nervous habit she never admitted to. She looked up and read my face the way she always could. "You saw him," she said, not a question. I nodded once. My throat felt raw. Diane's eyes filled, then hardened, then softened again. "Honey," she whispered, stepping toward me. "Maybe this is your chance. You can tell him the truth." The truth, like it was a simple object I could hand over and be forgiven. "He is married," I said. The words came out sharp, like I was punishing myself for even considering hope. My mother flinched. "Married does not always mean happy," she murmured, then regretted it immediately. I shook my head and walked to my room before she could say more. The door shut behind me, and for a moment I let myself sag against it. My body ached in places it should not, deep and grinding, like someone had replaced my joints with sand. I opened the top drawer of my dresser and pulled out the only thing I had never thrown away. A photo booth strip, the kind you get at a street fair. 4 squares. 4 versions of us. Mark laughing. Me trying not to laugh. Mark kissing my cheek. Me holding up my hand like a promise. Showing off a cheap ring he had bought with money he did not have. He had whispered that night, "When we get married, we will use these for the announcement." I had believed him so completely that it made me dizzy. I set the strip back down and took off the knit cap I wore even indoors. My hair had thinned to soft patches, stubborn and uneven. A reminder that my body was always negotiating with itself. I stared at my reflection and tried to practice a face that looked normal. A face that could live across the hall from Mark without breaking. Then my phone buzzed. A friend request. A new notification from the building resident group, the one everyone used for package theft complaints and passive-aggressive notes about laundry room. The name on the request made my stomach drop. Mark. 3 years ago, he had blocked me everywhere. He had vanished like I was poison. Now he was reaching through the screen like he could test whether I still existed. My thumb hovered. I told myself it meant nothing. Curiosity, convenience, neighborhood politeness. I pressed accept anyway. 10 minutes passed. No message. No hello. No explanation. I clicked his profile before I could stop myself. One photo. Mark and Claire, hands intertwined, smiling, like a postcard version of happiness. I did not cry when I left him. I did not cry when my diagnosis turned into a list of prescriptions and appointments. But looking at that photo, I finally broke, quiet and shaking, with my hand over my mouth so my mother would not hear. Because the worst part was not that he had married someone else. The worst part was realizing that he could stand 12 feet away from me and call me just a neighbor. And I had trained him to do it. Living across the hall from the man who once knew the shape of my breath became an exercise in controlled damage. I learned his schedule without meaning to. The sound of his door at 7:45 in the morning. The muted click of keys. The pause. Every single day, like he was checking something in his pocket and finding it missing. At night, his return came later, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with silence so heavy it pressed through the walls. I adjusted my life to avoid him. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. I did laundry at odd hours. I timed my grocery runs like military maneuvers. None of it worked. We collided anyway in the places that mattered. The first time was at the mailbox. I had just finished a double shift at the clinic, my body vibrating with exhaustion, my hands stiff from filling out intake forms for people who knew they were dying and still found a way to thank me. Mark stood there flipping through envelopes, sleeves rolled up, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. "Hey," he said, too casual, too practiced. "Hey," I answered. Silence bloomed between us. I could feel him watching me without looking. "You work late," he said. "I work in hospice," I replied. "Late is kind of the point." That made him look at me. Really look. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in something like recalibration. "I did not know that," he said. "You did not ask," I said, then regretted it immediately. He flinched just slightly. "Fair." We stood there with the hum of the lights and the smell of old paper. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Claire works in marketing. Tech firm downtown." "That sounds nice," I said. "It is," he replied, then hesitated. "She is very organized." I nodded like this was information I needed, like it did not feel like he was defending his life choices to someone who had forfeited the right to judge them. That night, my pain spiked so suddenly it dropped me to my knees in the shower. The hot water felt like needles. I bit down on a towel to keep from screaming. When it passed, I lay on the tile until the cold crept into my bones and forced me to move. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my doctor. I told myself this was the cost of proximity. Weeks went by. The building settled into winter. Mark stopped avoiding me. Not deliberately, but in that way people stop avoiding landmines once they convince themselves the ground is stable. We exchanged nods, sometimes a sentence. Once he held the door open for me when my hands were full. "Thanks," I said. "You are welcome," he replied, and his voice softened against his will. The crack came on a Tuesday. I was halfway down the stairs when my vision tunneled, the edges going dark like someone had turned down the lights on the world. I reached for the railing and missed. The fall was not dramatic. It was quick, hard. The sound my head made against concrete was dull, final. I woke up to Mark's voice saying my name like it was a question he was afraid to answer. "Kate." "Hey, stay with me." My cheek was pressed against something solid. His jacket. His hands were on my shoulders, steady, warm. He smelled the same. Soap and coffee and something clean that made my chest ache. "I am fine," I said automatically. "You are not," he snapped, then caught himself. "You fainted." "I get dizzy sometimes," I murmured, trying to sit up. "Do not," he said, firmer now. "I am calling an ambulance." "No," I whispered, panic cutting through the fog. "Please." His jaw tightened. "You hit your head." "I know," I said. "Please, just help me up." He hesitated, then slipped an arm under my knees and another behind my back, lifting me like I weighed nothing. The world spun, but his grip did not falter. Inside my apartment, my mother rushed out of the kitchen, her face draining of color when she saw me. "Again?" she breathed. Mark froze. "Again?" I shook my head, a warning I hoped she would understand. Diane straightened, swallowing. "Low blood pressure," she said too quickly. "She forgets to eat." Mark's eyes flicked to me, sharp now. "Is that true?" "It can be," I said. He lowered me onto the couch carefully, like I might break if he moved too fast. He knelt in front of me, his face level with mine, and I hated how instinctively my body leaned toward him. "You should see a doctor," he said. "I see plenty," I answered. "Then you should listen to them." I almost laughed, almost told him that I had built my life around listening to doctors. Claire appeared in the doorway then, her coat still on, her expression unreadable. "What happened?" she asked. "She fell," Mark said. Claire looked at me, then at my mother. "Do you need help?" "No," Diane said, defensive. "We are fine." Claire nodded, then turned to Mark. "Dinner is getting cold." Something shifted in his face, a calculation, a responsibility snapping back into place. "I will check on you tomorrow," he said to me, then paused. "If that is okay." I nodded because refusing felt like lying. That night, alone in my room, I took inventory. The fall had cost me more than bruises. My hands shook uncontrollably. My chest burned with each breath. I knew the signs. Progression. Acceleration. The disease was tired of being patient. The next morning, Mark knocked on my door at 8 sharp. He stood there with a paper bag and a seriousness that made my stomach knot. "I brought soup," he said. "Claire made it." "That was not necessary," I replied. "Eat it anyway." I stepped aside. He came in, glancing it around like he was seeing the place for the first time. The photos on the wall. The pill organizer on the counter that I had forgotten to hide. "What is that?" he asked. "Vitamins," I said too fast. He did not believe me. He never had been good at believing my lies. "Kate," he said quietly, "what is going on with you?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. I had practiced this moment for years, every version ending the same way. Him knowing, him hurting, him staying. "I am fine," I said. He straightened, disappointment flickering across his face. "You always say that, and you always want to fix things," I replied. "Some things do not need fixing." "That is not true," he said, voice rising despite himself. "You left because you thought I could not provide. You made a choice. Do not pretend this is about pride now." The words landed like a slap. I felt something inside me fracture. "You think I left because of money?" I asked. He exhaled sharply. "That is what you told me." I laughed then, a short, broken sound. "I told you what I needed you to believe." Silence stretched between us, heavy and dangerous. "What does that mean?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked, at the life etched into his face, the lines I had not earned the right to soften anymore. "It means," I said slowly, "that the story you tell yourself about me is the only reason you survived losing me." His eyes searched mine, alarm creeping in. "Kate," he said, "what are you not telling me?" My phone buzzed on the table. A reminder. Appointment. Oncology. Mark saw it. The color drained from his face. "What?" he whispered. "Is oncology?" I closed my eyes. And in that moment, I knew the lie that had protected him for 3 years was finally bleeding out. Mark did not speak for a long time after he saw the word oncology on my phone. He just stood there, frozen, like his body was waiting for permission to react. I watched the realization move through him in stages. Denial first, then confusion, then a quiet horror that settled behind his eyes. "That is cancer," he said finally, voice low, as if saying it louder would make it real. "It is disease," I corrected. "Not exactly cancer, but it sits at the same table." He shook his head once, sharp and disbelieving. "You do not work in oncology intake because you like the hours." I swallowed. The soup sat untouched between us. Steam gone, surface filmed over. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been sick?" I looked at the window, at the rain tracing paths down the glass. "Before I left you." The room felt smaller instantly, like the walls had taken a step inward. "No," he said. "No, you would have told me." "I did tell you," I replied softly. "Just not the truth." His hands clenched. "Why?" "Because I loved you. Because I did the math. Because I could not stand the idea of watching you dismantle your life to keep me breathing. Because I was afraid," I said instead. "And because you would have stayed." He let out a broken laugh. "That is the point." "I know." The anger came then, fast and bright. "You took my choice away," he said. "You decided what I could handle. You decided that loving you was a burden." I met his gaze. "It was." "No," he snapped. "It was love." "Love does not pay hospital bills," I said. "Love does not stop organs from failing. Love does not make it easier to watch someone you love disappear piece by piece." He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "So you left. You let me believe you were shallow. You let me build my life on a lie." "Yes." "You let me hate you." "Yes." His voice broke. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I have an idea," I said quietly. "I live with it every day." He stopped in front of me, eyes glassy, hands shaking. "How bad is it?" I hesitated. This was the line I had never crossed. Numbers made things real. "Progressive," I said. "Unpredictable." I manage symptoms. "I buy time." "How much time?" I looked down. "Not enough." He sat heavily in the chair across from me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. "Claire," he said suddenly, "I need to tell her." "You do not," I replied immediately. "This is not her responsibility." "It is mine," he shot back. "Mark," I said, forcing my voice steady, "you are married." He flinched at the word like it burned. "I married her because she was safe," he admitted. "Because she wanted the same things on the same timeline. Because she did not leave." I felt the sting, but I let it pass. That does not mean you love her the way you loved me. Silence fell again, heavy and thick. I cannot unhear this, he said. I cannot unknow it. You can, I replied. You already did once. He looked at me then, really looked. At the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hands trembled when I reached for water, the effort it took just to sit upright. You look tired, he whispered. I am, I said. He stood and crossed the room, kneeling in front of me again like he had the day I fell. Slowly, carefully, he took my hands in his. I would have stayed, he said. Even knowing this. I know. Then why was I not worth the risk? The question cut deep. I closed my eyes, letting the truth rise. Because, I said, voice shaking, if I was going to lose everything anyway, I needed to know you were safe first. Tears slid down his face unchecked. He did not wipe them away. You always did that, he said. You always protected everyone else. That was the only thing my body could still do reliably, I replied. A knock came at the door, sharp and intrusive. Claire, Mark stiffened. But I squeezed his hands once before letting go. I will talk to her, he said. No, I said firmly. Not like this. He hesitated. Kate, listen to me, I said. You do not get to make this about you fixing something. You get to sit with it. That is all. He nodded slowly, reluctantly. When Claire stepped inside, her eyes went immediately to his face, red and raw. What is going on? She asked. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at me, searching. I fainted, I said calmly. We were talking. Claire studied me, something sharp flickering behind her eyes. About what? About the past, I answered. And how it does not stay buried. Claire exhaled, arms crossing. Mark, can we go home? He looked torn, pulled between two lives that should never have intersected. I will check on her later, he said. Claire's jaw tightened. Mark? I will, he repeated. They left together, but the space he had occupied did not empty. It hummed, charged, like the aftermath of a storm. That night, the pain came harder than it ever had. I curled on my bed, teeth clenched, breath shallow, waiting for it to crest. I thought of Mark across the hall, lying beside his wife, staring at the ceiling. I thought of the lie finally exposed, bleeding into everything. I did not regret leaving him. I regretted surviving long enough to see him again. In the early hours of the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark. I cannot sleep. I keep thinking about the version of you I hated and how wrong I was. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I do not know what happens now, his message continued. But I am not walking away again. I closed my eyes. Because the truth, I had not said yet, was the most dangerous one of all. I was running out of time, and loving me now would cost him everything anyway. The truth did not explode our lives the way people think truth does. It seeped, quietly, relentlessly. Mark did not leave Claire that night, or the next, or even the week after. Instead, he began to unravel in small, devastating ways. Missed meetings, long silences at dinner, sleepless nights, where he stood on his balcony and stared at the city like it owed him an explanation. I watched from my window, the light from his apartment flickering on and off. A Morse code of regret I could not answer. My body continued its own quiet rebellion. Hospital visits blurred together. Blood draws, scans, adjustments to medication that worked just long enough to give me hope before taking it back. I did not tell Mark how bad it was getting. I did not tell him about the nights I could not stand without help, or the mornings I woke up already exhausted. Loving him again, even from a distance, felt dangerous. Necessary. Terminal. The last time we spoke face to face, it was raining hard enough to soak the world clean. He knocked on my door with red eyes and a decision carved into his bones. I told her, he said. I nodded. I had known he would. Mark was never good at living with half-truths. She asked me if I loved you, he continued. I did not answer. That was an answer, I said gently. She deserves better than silence, he said. So do you, I replied. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the familiar gravity pulling me in. I would choose you, he said. Even now, that was the moment I had feared most. Not the anger, not the guilt, the devotion. I know, I said, voice steady despite everything inside me screaming. And that is why you cannot. He searched my face, desperate. You do not get to decide that anymore. I do, I said. This is the one thing I still control. I told him then what I had been holding back. The prognosis, the narrowing timeline, the reality that love would not save me, only tether him to the slowest kind of goodbye. He did not argue after that. He just held me, careful and fierce, like he was memorizing the shape of me in real time. We did not kiss. We did not promise anything. We stood there while the rain battered the windows. Two people finally telling the truth with nothing left to bargain. Mark moved out 2 weeks later. Not to be with me, to be alone. To learn how to live with the cost of loving someone too late. Claire deserved honesty, and he gave it to her. I deserved peace, and I claimed it. Now I sit by the window most mornings, wrapped in blankets, watching the city wake up without me. My body is quieter these days, like it knows the fight is almost over. I am not afraid. I have loved deeply. I have been loved, even if only in fragments and echoes. If you ask whether I regret leaving him, the answer is no. If you ask whether I would do it again, knowing how it ends, the answer is still no. Some loves are not meant to survive. They are meant to teach, to scar, to shape who we become after the truth finally arrives. I was Kate. I loved him enough to let him go twice. And that was the most honest thing I ever did.